But right now, a lot of unrest on the streets in Israel, tens of thousands there pressuring the Netanyahu government to make a deal to bring the remaining hostages home. We want to get out live right now. Daniel Cohen is in Tel Aviv monitoring the latest developments on all of these fronts for us. Daniel, welcome in. It's good to have you today.
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Bianca, and hello, everyone. Frustrations are boiling over from here in Tel Aviv, where I'm standing. And let me just tell you, this is a huge protest, one of many that has gone on all day. They're saying, Akshav Iska, in Hebrew, they're saying now, deal. They want a deal right now. These are largely anti-Netanyahu government protesters here, but it's not just that feeling that's going on here in Tel Aviv, where there are people trying to make their voices heard, but also in Jerusalem, as you said, a much different and somber scene where the family is laying murdered American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland to rest. Goldberg Poland was one of the 6 more Israeli hostages killed by Hamas just hours before they could be rescued. We have video for you of the procession of family and mourners making their way through the streets of Jerusalem. They were waving Israeli flags, paying their final respects today en route to the cemetery. The 23-year-old had become a symbol of hope during his nearly year-long captivity in Gaza after a Hamas grenade blew off one of his arms on October 7th. Rachel Goldberg Poland, his mother, told mourners today it was a privilege to have Hersh as her son.
Days, amidst the inexplicable agony, terror, anguish, desperation, and fear, we became absolutely certain that you were coming home to us alive. But it was not to be. Now I no longer have to worry about you. I know you are no longer in danger.
Massive protests erupted on Sunday. They continue today. You see where I'm standing right now, a continuation of clashes that have happened between police and demonstrators, both in Tel Aviv and outside the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. Everyone in Israel is furious over the situation. Everyone. But the country is deeply divided, deeply fractured over who is to blame. The right blame Hamas for the hostage deaths. The left blame Netanyahu.
The people, the 6 hostages that died yesterday, they are part of us, and we could save them, okay? 11 months, they are waiting, they were alive, okay?
Benjamin Netanyahu must wake up to bring them home now, because this is the last chance for them to survive.
In a phone call Sunday, President Biden offered condolences to the parents of Goldberg Poland. President Trump blamed Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's poor leadership for Hersh's death. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke on Sunday as well. He called Hamas terrible, cold-blooded, while reiterating the fact that Israel has agreed to huge concessions in order to try to get the hostages back in Israel, that it's the terrorists, Bianca, who have become intransigent. They've turned down over a dozen hostage deals. They're the ones who are refusing to make a deal. And the tension that you see and the tension that you hear on main streets in Tel Aviv that are completely shut down, and you hear people protesting, that is spilling over. The frustration, the tension has boiled over. We'll have to see what happens in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. Bianca, back to you.
All right, Daniel Cohen, thank you so much. I know it's a very fluid situation there on the street, so I appreciate it. And keep us posted on what you're seeing on the ground there, please. Pleased to bring in right now former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, former Acting Director of National Intelligence and Senior National Security Analyst Ric Grenell. Ambassador, good to see you today.
Thanks for having me, Bianca. What a day.
Oh, it is incredible. I'm watching the streets there erupting, but I'm also hearing just the heartbreak of the families there. And my heart breaks for everyone. It just seems that we're in this place here where it didn't probably have to be this way. You have hostages killed 48 to 72 hours before their bodies were recovered. And now Harris and Biden are sitting down with a negotiating team, and she goes to Michigan, where you know that Arab community there is a voting bloc that they are desperate to win.
Well, look, let's start from Hersh Goldberg's mom wearing 332, the number on her chest there. And that represents how many days that we've gone in this war without a peace agreement. And I'm somebody who talks about a peace agreement, not a ceasefire, because inherent in the idea of a ceasefire is that the war continues. or that the war is going on and we just have a pause. I want to see total peace agreements. And I see in Israel, there's a very healthy democracy and a debate about what to do. What I don't see is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris looking inward because they funded this war. Let's be very clear. The Trump administration, Donald Trump, had squeezed the Iranians. They were bankrupt. They couldn't pursue a nuclear weapon, and they couldn't fund wars. Once the sanctions were dropped, and sanctions and cash and credit were given to the Iranian regime, then we saw hundreds of billions of dollars given to Iran, and they funded this war.
Exactly. And we're looking at Tel Aviv in the streets there, and compared to what you were just talking about, Donald Trump, the Abraham Accords, Middle East stabilization there, very different contrast here. And I want to play a little bit of Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate in Minnesota State Fair. He's asked about the recovery of 6 bodies of hostages, one an American Israeli. And this is his actual reaction to reporters. It's pretty stunning. I'll play this for our viewers.
What's your reaction to the 6 hostages being found dead in Gaza?
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Walks away with a ice cream or smoothie. Biden's been on the beach. Here we are. You talk about a healthy, democracy, going on here. But at the end of the day, none of this needs to be as where we are today. And I think part of this, too, is where the media may be a bit complicit. CNN headline talking about the American hostage who was executed saying, well, he has died. All of this has sort of led to this, conflict here where we see the pro-Hamas, radical left pressuring, perhaps putting even more pressure on Kamala Harris and Joe Biden not to get things done.
Well, first of all, let's remove the politics for a second and just let me share with you a fact that I learned from being at the UN, the United Nations, for 8 years. Mm-hmm. Every single world crisis requires United States leadership. It doesn't always require United States money or boots on the ground, but it requires us to be a leader. It requires us to go in and bring all of the sides together, to call the meeting, to demand that everybody show up, to enforce some sort of peace agreement. That's what's missing right now from the United States. We do not have an administration that is willing to push hard to find a solution. U.S. leadership is completely gone. And now, if you bring in the politics, all Kamala Harris can think about is Michigan and Pennsylvania. She's concentrating on trying to balance the Arabs in Detroit with the Jews in Philadelphia. And it's really offensive to think about these crises, hostages, and war in terms of blatant politics like that. But that is what she and her advisors are doing. And so you see this back and forth. Someone said to me this morning, the Biden-Harris administration doesn't seem to know what the policy is. And I said, well, they know what the policy is, and the policy is to try to win Michigan and Pennsylvania. So they give one to Michigan, one to Philadelphia. And what happens is it's very confusing for our allies and for Americans.
Exactly. And it's very advantageous for our adversaries, too, looking at a weak leadership here or non-existent who's running the country, and they can take advantage of that. We had the Kremlin spokesman saying Harris is more predictable than Trump, this interview, where Dmitry Peskov says, quote, we have no candidate, but of course, the Democrats are more predictable. And what Putin said about Biden's predictability applies to almost all Democrats, including Ms. Harris. So they're on the sidelines looking at this, and they know if Donald Trump gets back in the White House, what the future holds, whether it be sanctions or whether it be actually ending some of these conflicts here that started under this administration's watch, Rick.
Look, there's no question that statement is in support of the Harris-Waltz ticket. They would not have said that. The Russians are very careful with their words. They would not have said that unless they wanted Kamala Harris to win. And let's be honest, we Americans know that Kamala Harris is predictable. We know exactly what she's going to do, which is all politics, say one thing, do another. And so that's what the Russians want. That's what Putin wants. That's what our adversaries want, is they want a U.S. president who can do exactly what they predict the U.S. president to do.
Yep.
And so that's a scary moment because we need unpredictability. We need credibility. Donald Trump is a credible threat, whether it's sanctions or military action or tariffs. When Donald Trump says something, it's a credible threat.
And he also knows how to comfort those in a crisis. We saw that at Arlington National last week with the Gold Star families, and it was a really poignant moment. And yet Kamala Harris is trying to attack this moment here, saying it was disrespectful of sacred ground. How can she actually go when it was on their watch, Abbey Gate? Everyone knows that the fallen service members that day, a sniper could have actually changed the fate for all of them. It seems like a real big misstep for the Harris campaign, Rick. And Gold Star families have put out an ad saying, no, Donald Trump has been there for us, comforting us.
Look, I was so glad to see President Trump go and be with these families. These families have been suffering. The United States government, including Joe Biden, checking his watch, hasn't ever given them the time to actually grieve and the reasons for why he vacated so fast. I can tell you, I've been in the Oval Office with Donald Trump when the experts on the ground in Afghanistan would say, Mr. President, I know you want to get us out, but we've got to do it slowly and we've got to have a controlled release. And so President Trump would reluctantly say, okay, I'm listening to the experts on the ground. I'd like it to go faster. I want to get this done. I want to exit Afghanistan. But every single time, Bianca, he listened to the experts on the ground. Joe Biden didn't, because the experts on the ground were telling him, not now, you're going too fast. And Biden ignored that. And so I think there's a difference between listening to advice and just doing something very political, as Joe Biden has done.
Seems like all they're doing now is political, as we are 64 days away from the election. They're trying to get victory laps and things that just are alternate realities, as you know. Finally, like this seems like a political stunt here. The U.S. is now seizing the Venezuelan president's plane, takes it to Florida, Nicolas Maduro's airplane. So there's a violation of sanctions. So they flew the aircraft. So this gets them a little bit of headline here. But Venezuela, they've sort of been in a very interesting predicament with that election as well.
Yeah, look, the Biden team and the State Department under Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken's State Department, has been a really inconsistent disaster when it comes to all of the Western Hemisphere. We cut a deal with the Venezuelans and we said, if you allow one person to run against Maduro, we will ease oil sanctions. And so Joe Biden eased some oil sanctions. And then, of course, they allowed, Maduro allowed somebody to run against him, but Maduro was still counting the votes. I think if Jesus Christ was running against Maduro and Maduro was counting the votes, there still would be a win for Maduro. Yeah. And so it was a dumb idea, a real weak negotiation by the State Department. They got outsmarted by Maduro. But let's be clear on one thing. We don't have an embassy in Venezuela. All of the work is being done out of our embassy in Bogota, Colombia. And we now are faced with the Chinese coming in to take over oil fields. The Venezuelans are working with the Chinese. This has been a total disaster, and we need to be able to get this right. And we need to be consistent when it comes to our policies.
We sure do. Well, Joe Biden will be on the campaign trail today with Kamala Harris finally emerging after 70 days on the beach. As we watch Israel as well, the streets are erupting with unrest. Ambassador Grenell, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your analysis today here on Newsline.
All the best, my friend.
Thank you.